My friends, for centuries the world has repeated the words of the Master, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God." And yet very few have paused long enough to ask where this kingdom is to be found, or why so many sincere seekers feel as though they are walking in circles, praying without answer, striving without peace. And so I want to speak to you not as one offering a new doctrine, but as one reminding you of what Jesus himself revealed so simply, so plainly, that the human mind overlooked it. The kingdom of God is within you, not above you, not ahead of you, not hidden in some distant geography, nor reserved for a future moment after death. Within you, within your consciousness, within the very life you are living at this instant. You see, the tragedy of much spiritual seeking is that it begins with the assumption that God is absent. And when you believe God is absent, your entire search becomes an attempt to bring God from somewhere else into your experience. And when you believe the kingdom is far off, your spiritual journey becomes a lifelong effort to reach what seems forever beyond your grasp. But the Master did not say, "Seek to bring the kingdom," nor did he ask you to journey toward it as though it were an object hidden behind the stars. He revealed a presence already here, already complete, already functioning as the very life of your being. If you have ever cried out, "Where is God? Why does God feel distant?" you have already accepted the premise that creates all spiritual frustration. And so today, let us lay that false premise aside. Let us begin from the truth. Let us begin from the recognition that God is not a traveler who must arrive, not a power that must be summoned, not a reward that must be earned. God is the living presence at the center of your consciousness, the invisible life that is your life, the infinite love that animates every breath and movement of your existence. You have not been failing in your spiritual search. You have simply been taught to look outward when Jesus pointed inward. You have been told to strive for what must be realized, not achieved. And so, as we embark upon this journey together, let us do so with a humble willingness to release the old idea of God as a far-off being who occasionally intervenes, and open ourselves to the recognition of God as the very essence of our own being. In this hour, I invite you not to strive, not to struggle, but to awaken, to discover that the kingdom you have sought so long with such earnestness has never been hidden from you. It has been present, fully present, within the depths of your own consciousness, awaiting only your recognition. And as this recognition dawns, you will find yourself at peace, not because you have reached God, but because you have discovered that God has never departed from you. Now let us look more deeply into the very reason spiritual seekers become weary, discouraged, and disheartened in their search for God. It is not because God is difficult to find. It is not because heaven is hidden behind a veil that only the worthy may lift. It is because almost the entire world, including the religious world, has trained us to seek God where God is not. And when you seek where God is not, you can only return empty-handed, no matter how sincere your prayer or how devout your heart. Consider for a moment how many times you have turned to the outer world expecting it to reveal God to you, expecting a person, a sign, a manifestation, a change in circumstance, a divine intervention to prove that God is present. And yet every time you do this, you unknowingly affirm a belief the Master never taught, that God is separate from you, separate from your consciousness, separate from your very life. And the moment you accept separation, even unconsciously, you cannot help but feel the weight of spiritual loneliness, the ache of believing God is somewhere you are not. When the mind believes in distance, it naturally seeks solutions in distance. It prays from a sense of lack. It reaches outward in desperation. It tries to bring God down into the moment or to coax peace into a troubled situation. But my friends, This is the very reason prayer feels unanswered. Not because God is withholding anything, but because we are praying from a premise that has no spiritual foundation, the premise of absence. Do you see the problem? If you pray as though God is far, you reinforce the illusion of distance. If you believe the kingdom is ahead of you, you bind yourself to endless searching. If you imagine that God's guidance, God's provision, or God's healing must travel toward you from outside, you silently deny the truth that God is the life of your being here now, fully present and wholly complete. This is why the world's seekers grow tired. It is not the search that exhausts them, it is the direction of the search. Outward effort consumes energy, inward realization restores it. Outward effort breeds fear, inward realization releases it. Outward effort implies that something essential is missing. Inward realization reveals that nothing has ever been absent. The frustration so many experience in their spiritual lives arises from an innocent but fundamental misunderstanding. The belief that God's presence must be obtained rather than recognized, sought rather than realized, requested rather than revealed from within. And as long as the mind believes that God and man stand apart, your prayers, your meditations, your spiritual practices will feel like attempts to bridge an impossible distance. Let us be very clear. You are not frustrated because God is silent. You are frustrated because you have been listening in the wrong direction. When you look outward for what is already within, you can only encounter emptiness. But when you turn within, even slightly, even with the smallest mustard seed willingness, you begin to feel a subtle shift, a softening, a quiet assurance. You sense that you are not striving toward God, you are resting in God. You sense that the spiritual journey is not the path of reaching outward, but the path of awakening inward. And it is this awakening that leads us to the next stage of our spiritual unfolding. Let us look now at the teaching of the Master, not through the lens of tradition, nor through the weight of inherited interpretation, but through the quiet inner illumination that reveals spiritual truth as it is. For Jesus spoke words that were not meant merely to inform the mind, but to awaken the soul to its own divine reality. And among these words, none are more central, more misunderstood, and more transformative than the statement, "The kingdom of God is within you." You must understand that Jesus was not pointing to a place. He was not describing a realm to be reached after death, nor a kingdom that would someday descend visibly upon the earth. He was speaking from the consciousness of one who lived in perpetual union with the infinite. When he used the word kingdom, he was describing the awareness of God's presence, an awareness that transcends time, transcends form, and reveals itself as the substance of all being. And when he declared that this kingdom is within you, he tore down every doctrine of distance that humanity had built around God. But the human mind, bound to the senses, could not grasp such a revelation. And so through the centuries, the teachings of Jesus were interpreted through the framework of duality, God above and man below, heaven in the future and struggle in the present. Yet Jesus himself never taught duality. He taught oneness. He taught immediacy. He taught the infinite nearness of God. I and my Father are one. The Father is within me. My kingdom is not of this world. Let us look now at the teaching of the Master, not through the lens of tradition, nor through the weight of inherited interpretation, but through the quiet inner illumination that reveals spiritual truth as it is. For Jesus spoke words that were not meant merely to inform the mind, but to awaken the soul to its own divine reality. And among these words, none are more central, more misunderstood, and more transformative than the statement, "The kingdom of God is within you." Let us look now at the teaching of the Master, not through the lens of tradition, nor through the weight of inherited interpretation, but through the quiet inner illumination that reveals spiritual truth as it is. For Jesus spoke words that were not meant merely to inform the mind, but to awaken the soul to its own divine reality. And among these words, none are more central, more misunderstood, and more transformative than the statement, "The kingdom of God is within you." The moment you imagine the kingdom as something to be entered through effort, you have already stepped outside it. But the moment you realize that God is the very essence of your being, the very breath that moves through you, the very intelligence that animates your life, you have already entered the kingdom without moving an inch. For this kingdom is not reached by time or distance, it is revealed through recognition. Do you see the problem? If you pray as though God is far, you reinforce the illusion of distance. If you believe the kingdom is ahead of you, you bind yourself to endless searching. If you imagine that God's guidance, God's provision, or God's healing must travel toward you from outside, you silently deny the truth that God is the life of your being here now, fully present and wholly complete. It is the unchanging, invisible reality behind all visible form. And when he declared that this kingdom is within you, he tore down every doctrine of distance that humanity had built around God. In this recognition, spiritual seeking begins to change shape. You are no longer reaching outward for God's presence. You are no longer waiting for a future manifestation. You are no longer living in anticipation of a divine intervention that may or may not come. Instead, you are awakening to the truth that the presence you seek is the very consciousness with which you are listening to these words. It is the unchanging, invisible reality behind all visible form. And it is here, in this dawning realization, that the shift from asking God to realizing God begins. When we read Jesus through Goldsmith's consciousness, we discover that the teachings were never meant to direct us toward a future salvation, but toward a present realization. They were never meant to create believers, but revealers, not followers of doctrine, but awakeners to the inner Christ, the inner kingdom, the inner presence that has always been the life of our being. The world prays in one way, and the Christ consciousness prays in another. The world prays by petition, "God, please do this for me. Please intervene. Please fix. Please repair." But the Master and all who have awakened as he awakened pray by realization. They do not try to bring God into a situation. They do not attempt to persuade God to act. They rest in the quiet, knowing that God, being infinite, omnipresent, and indivisible, is already the only presence in that situation, whether or not appearances agree. This is the radical shift that Joel Goldsmith emphasized. Prayer is not a method of getting God to do something. Prayer is the realization that God already is all. And this realization becomes possible only when we stop treating God as though he were outside our own being. You see, the moment you ask God to enter a circumstance, you have implicitly assumed his absence. And the moment you assume his absence, you cannot possibly experience his presence, for the very premise of your prayer is separation. The bootless cry, as Goldsmith called it, is the prayer of a mind that imagines God is somewhere else. But when you understand the truth, when you realize that God is not coming from afar, that God is not outside the problem, not outside the body, not outside the relationship, you stop trying to reach outward and you begin to rest inwardly. You begin to sense that there is a presence at the core of your being, a presence that does not need your persuasion, your pleading, or your pressure. You begin to discover that God is not the answer to your prayer. God is the silence that reveals there was never a question. Let us be very practical here. When you ask God to heal a condition, you are assuming a power apart from God, a power that caused the illness. When you ask God to fix a relationship, You are assuming that another person holds power over your peace. When you ask God to open a door, you are assuming that human circumstance can block divine activity. All of this is spiritual impossibility. There is no power apart from God. There is no presence apart from God. There is no activity, no substance, no law that can stand outside the one. And so Goldsmith would say, stop giving power to the problem. Realize that God is the only power present, and the problem dissolves of itself. This is the essence of the shift. We stop asking God to change the outer picture. We realize God is the invisible reality behind all pictures. And when we do this, something wondrous happens. We find that fear loosens its grip. We find that the mind becomes still. We find that circumstances begin to shift without our manipulation, not because we ask God to change them, but because we recognize the presence that was always governing them. As long as you believe your good comes from outside, from people, from the world, from favorable conditions, you will continue to pray outwardly, anxiously, pleadingly. But the moment you realize that God is the life of your life, the peace of your peace, the intelligence of your mind, the substance of your supply, and the harmony of your relationships, you will find that you no longer pray to get. You pray to realize, to become aware of what is eternally true. This is the prayer of the mystic. This is the prayer of the master. This is the prayer of all who have entered the kingdom consciousness. Not a prayer of asking, but a prayer of recognition. Not a prayer of seeking, but a prayer of seeing. Not a prayer of striving, but a prayer of resting in the truth that God is already here. And it is this recognition that prepares us to discern the great distinction between material sense and spiritual consciousness, which is the foundation for entering the kingdom within. Before we can enter the kingdom within, we must understand why the outer world appears so real, so commanding, so overwhelming. We must understand why fear grips us, why circumstances disturb us, why lack seems possible, and why God can appear distant even when we believe in Him with all our hearts. And the reason is simple, though the mind resists it at first. We have been trained from birth to trust the five senses. We have been taught that what we see, hear, taste, touch, and smell is reality. And so we live as though appearances are the final truth, unaware that we are interpreting the world through the limited instrument of material sense. Before we can enter the kingdom within, we must understand why the outer world appears so real, so commanding, so overwhelming. We must understand why fear grips us, why circumstances disturb us, why lack seems possible, and why God can appear distant even when we believe in Him with all our hearts. And the reason is simple, though the mind resists it at first. We have been trained from birth to trust the five senses. But spiritual consciousness reveals something entirely different. Spiritual consciousness is the awareness that God alone is the reality of all being. God alone is the life of every person. God alone is the substance of every form. God alone is the law governing the universe. And because God is indivisible, infinite, and omnipresent, there is no true power apart from God, no second presence, no second cause, no opposing force that can threaten the harmony already established in spirit. This is the meaning of oneness. Not that everything is spiritually connected, but that everything is spiritually one. Let us be practical. When you see disease in the body, that is the testimony of material sense. When you see conflict in a relationship, that is the testimony of material sense. When you see lack in your affairs, that is the testimony of material sense. When you see danger in the world, that too is the testimony of material sense. And if you accept these testimonies as the truth, you will experience fear, doubt, and separation. because you are living as though appearances possess reality, authority, and power. But when you rise into spiritual consciousness, something remarkable occurs. You begin to recognize that all appearance, whether harmonious or discordant, is but the play of the senses. Behind the appearance stands the spiritual reality, unchanged and unchanging. God, the only presence. God, the only power. God, the only law. God, the only life. God, the only substance. And as this recognition deepens, the outer picture begins to shift, not because you changed it through mental effort, but because you no longer give it the power it never possessed. Goldsmith would often say, you do not heal a condition. You reveal the presence of God, and the condition yields. And this is the essence of spiritual consciousness, the awareness of what is eternally true, regardless of what the senses report. The world may say, there is danger. Spiritual consciousness whispers, God is here. The world may say, there is lack. Spiritual consciousness knows. Infinite supply is the nature of God. The world may say, there is conflict. Spiritual consciousness rests in God is the harmony of all being. And the moment you accept the spiritual as real, the material loses its authority over your peace. But let us be very honest. You cannot force yourself into spiritual consciousness. You cannot affirm your way into it. You cannot shout into it or demand it. Spiritual consciousness dawns as material sense loosens its grip. And material sense loosens its grip only when we stop feeding it with fear, judgment, and the belief that it has power. The Master said, judge not according to appearance, but judge righteous judgment. Righteous judgment is not moral judgment. It is spiritual recognition, the ability to look straight at the appearance and know that it is not the truth. It is knowing that behind every discord, the presence of God remains untouched. It is knowing that behind every seeming lack, the fullness of Spirit is already present. It is knowing that behind every storm, the calm reality of God stands unimpaired. And it is precisely this understanding that prepares the way for the practice of entering the kingdom within, not by attempting to change appearances, but by recognizing the spiritual presence that lies behind them, within them, and as their true essence. Now that we understand the distinction between material sense and spiritual consciousness, we can begin to approach the most sacred aspect of this path, the actual practice of entering the kingdom within. And let us be clear from the beginning, this is not a practice of doing, this is not a technique for manipulating thought, nor is it a method for improving the outer world. It is a practice of recognition, of quiet receptivity, of turning from the outer appearances to the inner reality that has always been present but seldom acknowledged. In the human search for God, people have used many forms of prayer. They have pleaded, begged, affirmed, recited, commanded, declared. They have tried to convince themselves and God of what they desire. But all of these belong to the realm of the human mind. They begin with the assumption that there is a lack, and that through thought or emotion, that lack may be corrected. Spiritual listening, as Goldsmith taught it, begins from a wholly different premise, that nothing is lacking because God is already the fullness and the completeness of every moment. This is why true prayer begins in silence, not the silence of discipline or restraint, but the silence of relinquishment. The silence that arises when we release the belief that we must direct God, inform God, or persuade God. It is the silence that comes when we understand that God is not in need of our words, our instruction, or our guidance. God is the very presence we are seeking. And so spiritual listening is not an attempt to reach God. It is the willingness to allow the presence to reveal itself. When we enter this sacred silence, we do not ask, we do not seek signs, we do not attempt to feel spiritual or produce inspiration. We simply become still, inwardly still, and allow the truth to disclose itself. For spiritual truth is not created by the mind. It is revealed to the mind that is quiet enough to receive it. And what is revealed? Not always words, not always messages. More often, it is a subtle sense of peace that is not of this world, a soft assurance that does not come from reason, a gentle awareness that something real, something profound, something eternal is present right where you are. And when that presence is felt, even faintly, you have begun to enter the kingdom. For the kingdom is not a realm of thought, it is the atmosphere of God realized within your consciousness. Goldsmith would say, do not try to make anything happen in prayer. Why? Because the moment you try to make something happen, you have shifted into the human mind, and the human mind cannot enter the kingdom. The mind that tries to achieve God cannot see God, for it is trying to grasp what can only be revealed. Instead, we approach quietly. Here I am, Father, not asking, not trying, not striving, simply open. In this openness, you may become aware of a gentle inner movement as though truth is unfolding of its own accord. You may feel a sense of safety as though nothing outside you holds power. You may feel the burdens of the day loosening as though their weight was never truly yours, or you may simply feel nothing at all, yet know inwardly that something deep and invisible is taking place. This is the beginning of spiritual listening, a turning from the outer world of effect to the inner world of cause, a willingness to let God be God. And the more often you return to this stillness, not as a duty, but as a refuge, the more natural it becomes. You begin to sense the presence not only in meditation, but in the ordinary moments of life, standing in a doorway, pausing in the midst of a conversation, resting between breaths, and awareness begins to permeate your experience. The kingdom is here. Do not measure your progress. Do not attempt to capture the feeling. Simply return again and again to the stillness in which God reveals himself not as a distant being, but as the life of your own being. This is the practice by which the walls of material sense begin to thin and the light of spiritual consciousness begins to shine through. It is the doorway into the kingdom within. And now that we understand how to enter this inner sanctuary, we can begin to explore how to recognize the signs of its dawning, how to tell in the quiet moments of life that you have already stepped into the atmosphere of God's presence. As we proceed, let us understand something very important. The kingdom of God does not suddenly descend upon you like a light from the sky. It does not announce itself with trumpets, nor does it arrive with a dramatic inner explosion. The kingdom reveals itself in the quietest of ways, in subtle shifts of perception, in gentle movements of awareness, in moments so simple you might overlook them if you are searching for something grand. You see, the kingdom is not a future attainment. It is a present reality. And the moment your consciousness begins to relax into the truth of God's nearness, the signs of the kingdom begin to show themselves. They do not appear in the outer world first. They appear within you. And when they appear, they carry a distinct quality, a softness, a stillness, a peace that the world cannot imitate. One of the first signs is this: problems lose their sense of finality. You look at the same condition, the same circumstance, the same relationship, and yet something within you whispers, this is not all there is. You begin to sense that what you are seeing is but the surface of things, and behind that surface is a presence untouched by the appearance. This quiet sense of something more is the first hint that spiritual consciousness is dawning. Another sign is the easing of inner tension, not necessarily the disappearance of all outer challenges, but the loosening of the emotional grip they once held on you. You begin to observe instead of react. You begin to watch instead of fear. Even in the midst of difficulty, there arises a center of stillness, a feeling that you are upheld by something greater than the circumstance. This stillness is not self-made. It is the fragrance of the kingdom. A third sign is that you stop trying to fix life through human effort. This is not passivity. It is trust. You no longer rush to manipulate outer events or control outcomes. Instead, you turn within first. You pause, you listen, you remember the presence, and in that remembrance, you find guidance that does not come from thinking, but from knowing. When decisions arise from this inner knowing, they carry peace instead of fear. That peace is the evidence of the kingdom. You may also notice that forgiveness begins to happen without effort, not because you have willed yourself to forgive, but because the sense of separation itself begins to dissolve. You start seeing others not as separate personalities capable of harming you, but as expressions of the same divine life struggling through human limitation. The enemy becomes a brother. The insult loses power. The past releases its hold. Forgiveness becomes a natural consequence of seeing truly. Another sign is the awakening of gratitude, not gratitude for things, but gratitude for being. A quiet joy arises simply from the recognition that God is here, that life is unfolding, that you are not alone in the universe. This gratitude is not directed outward. It wells up from within, uncaused by anything external. It is the heart's response to the felt presence of God. And perhaps the clearest sign of all is this: you begin to sense that nothing is outside God. You may find yourself pausing throughout the day and silently recognizing God is here. In the grocery store, in a conversation, in a moment of conflict, in the stillness before sleep, something deep within acknowledges the presence, not as a belief, not as a philosophy, but as an inner fact. This recognition is the kingdom. You do not have to be perfect to experience these signs. You do not have to sustain them every moment. Even a fleeting glimpse is enough to show you that you have touched the edge of something real, something that does not come and go, though your awareness of it may. And every glimpse leaves a trace. Every moment of recognition strengthens the spiritual capacity to see beyond appearance. When these signs appear even subtly, you may know with certainty the kingdom has already begun to reveal itself in your consciousness. You are not approaching it, you are awakening within it. And now that you know how to recognize these early dawnings of spiritual awareness, we may move naturally into the next stage of this journey, entering more deeply into the inner kingdom through a quiet, receptive meditation, a practice not of doing, but of being. Let us now turn inward together, not to perform a technique, not to repeat words, not to achieve an experience, but simply to rest in the awareness of the presence that has been with us from the beginning. In this moment, there is nothing you must accomplish. There is nothing you must correct or improve. There is only the gentle willingness to set aside the world of appearances and allow the truth to reveal itself within your own being. We begin not by reaching outward, but by releasing every mental habit that seeks to grasp or manipulate the spiritual. There is nothing to grasp. Spirit is not an object. God is not distant. The kingdom is not a goal. We are not climbing toward God, we are relaxing into God. And so we enter this quietness with a simple inward recognition. God is here, not coming, not arriving, already here. Let the mind rest. Let the thoughts pass without engagement. Let the concerns of the outer world dissolve into the background. You are not trying to silence the mind. You are gently withdrawing attention from it, returning to the simple awareness of presence. Feel the freedom of not having to pray to God, but resting in the truth that God is already the life within you. Let this inner whisper arise of its own accord. The kingdom is within me, not as a belief, but as a fact of spiritual being. Do not try to feel anything. Feelings come and go. Truth remains. If a sense of peace comes, receive it. If no feeling comes, be at peace anyway. Truth does not depend on the senses. Now, allow this deeper recognition to settle into your awareness. God is the only presence, not the strongest presence, not a competing presence. Let this inner whisper arise of its own accord. The kingdom is within me, not as a belief, but as a fact of spiritual being. And as this recognition deepens, even slightly, the outer world begins to loosen its claim on your attention. You begin to sense the subtle atmosphere of the kingdom, a stillness that was here long before this moment, a peace that does not arise from the world and cannot be taken from you. Now, allow this deeper recognition to settle into your awareness. God is the only presence, not the strongest presence, not a competing presence. Let this inner whisper arise of its own accord. The kingdom is within me, not as a belief, but as a fact of spiritual being. I am in God. God is in me. We are one, not two beings united, but one life expressing itself as individual being. Rest in this oneness. Do not attempt to understand it. Understanding belongs to the mind. This recognition belongs to spirit. Let this final realization unfold gently within you. The kingdom I sought is the presence that lives me. The peace I longed for is the truth of my own being. The God I prayed to is the life that I am. Rest in this truth. Let it hold you. Let it reveal itself to you in its own way, in its own time, in its own stillness. And when you return from this moment, you carry nothing outward, but something inward has quietly shifted, and this shift will reveal itself in ways you do not need to anticipate. For the kingdom has not come to you. You have awakened to the kingdom that was always here. As we bring this hour together to its quiet close, let us not think of what has been said as a lesson to be remembered, nor as a philosophy to be carried by the mind. What we have touched in these moments is not teaching, it is realization. It is the gentle unveiling of a truth that has been present within you since before time began. And the greatest gift you can give yourself is simply to continue returning to this inner awareness, not through effort, but through remembrance. For the kingdom of God is not an experience reserved for meditation alone. It is the ground upon which your true life stands. It is the air of spirit that surrounds you. It is the quiet presence that walks with you into every circumstance, every relationship, every choice, every breath. You do not leave the kingdom when you rise from silence, nor do you enter the world as though it were separate from God. The world of appearance may shift and change, but the kingdom remains the invisible reality behind every moment of your journey. Remember this. You are not a traveler seeking God. You are the place where God reveals himself. You are not a soul wandering toward the kingdom. You are the consciousness through which the kingdom comes into view. Do not struggle to hold this awareness. Do not make a task of living spiritually. Simply learn to pause many times throughout the day and gently turn inward, not to find God, but to recognize that God has never departed. In that pause, even if it is only the length of a single breath, you may notice the subtle atmosphere of peace that signals the presence, and that peace becomes your guidance. That peace becomes your protection. That peace becomes your supply. That peace becomes your wisdom. The world of appearance may shift and change, but the kingdom remains the invisible reality behind every moment of your journey. Not because you have earned it or summoned it, but because it is the very foundation of your being. Let this awareness accompany you. Let it move with you into the ordinary routines of life. Let it enter your conversations, your work, your rest, your moments of solitude, your moments of connection. Let the kingdom be the silent influence behind every step you take. And as you do, you will find that you are living in a world where nothing stands outside God, nothing opposes God, nothing diminishes God, and therefore nothing can diminish you, because your life is the life of God expressed. My friends, the search is over, not because you have reached the end, but because you have awakened to the beginning, to the presence that has been your life all along. And from this awareness, everything changes, not by your effort, but by the natural unfolding of divine harmony through your consciousness. Rest in this truth. Let it guide you. Let it illuminate the path before you, and know with quiet certainty that the kingdom of God is not merely near, it is your very self realized. There comes a time in every seeker's life when the outer forms of religion no longer satisfy the inner ache of the soul, not because religion has failed, but because the soul has begun to outgrow the belief that God resides somewhere outside itself. And so, without any fanfare, without any announcement, there arises in your heart a quiet question: where is God? Where is this presence that the prophets spoke of, that the mystics tasted, that Jesus lived? If you are listening with the ears of the Spirit, you will discover that God is not found in argument, not in doctrine, not in belief, not in tradition. God is revealed in silence. It is in the silence that the true meaning of the word Christ begins to dawn upon the consciousness. You see, the Christ is not a name. It is not a title. It is not a historical label we attach to one man who walked the hills of Galilee. The Christ is a state of divine being. It is the living presence of God expressing itself through individual consciousness. And because this presence is infinite, because it is omnipresent, it cannot belong to one man or one age or one faith. It is the light that lighteth every man that cometh into the world. But for 2,000 years, humanity has repeated the name Christ without entering the silence from which that name arises. We have worshipped the outer form while missing the inner essence. And the inner essence is this: the Christ is the I of you. The Christ is the very presence that looks through your eyes, breathes your breath, beats your heart, thinks your thoughts. It is the divine identity forever hidden behind the mask of personality. When Jesus used the word I, he did not mean the personal self. He did not mean the carpenter's son. He did not mean a man apart from you. He spoke from the eternal I, the infinite I, the divine I am, that is the substance of all life. And when he said, I am the light of the world, he was revealing the nature of the Christ, not claiming an exclusive privilege, but speaking from the reality that belongs to every soul. There is a vast difference between repeating the words of Scripture and entering the silence out of which those words were spoken. In the silence, you learn that the Christ is nearer than breath, closer than your own sense of I. In silence, you learn that you are never speaking as a person searching for God. You are the very one through whom God reveals himself. This realization does not come through intellectual study. It does not come through emotional fervor. It comes through a yielding, a gentle surrender of the mind's belief in a personal identity. It comes when you become still enough to hear the whisper beneath all thought, I am here. I am the life of you. I am the presence you have sought. This is the silence behind the name Christ. This is the beginning of spiritual vision. This is the threshold of the inner kingdom. And as you stand at this threshold, something in you begins to awaken, not the human self, but the spiritual identity that has been waiting through centuries of conditioning. Not a new self, not an improved self, but the self that has always been, the self that could never be touched by sin, disease, or fear. Do not look outward for the Christ. Do not seek a figure on a cross or a teacher in history. Turn within into the quiet space where the sense of I arises before thought. There you will find the Christ not as a belief, not as a hope, but as the living presence of God expressing as your very being. It is to this inner recognition that Jesus called humanity. It is this inner recognition that Joel Goldsmith spent his life explaining, and it is to this inner recognition that we now turn as we begin to explore the revelation that religion could not hold, but that the soul can never forget. The Christ is the I of you, and the journey begins in stillness. As we move deeper, let us be very still, for what we touch now is sacred. We are not examining history for the sake of argument, nor are we criticizing any tradition. We are simply unveiling a truth that has been obscured by centuries of sincere misunderstanding. When a revelation is given to the world, it comes through the consciousness of an individual. But its purpose is never to glorify the individual. It is to awaken the same consciousness in all who hear the message. Jesus came not to display a unique spiritual privilege, but to reveal the spiritual identity that belongs to every man, woman, and child on this earth. He came to show that the Christ is the true self of every soul. Yet, as humanity received this revelation, something very human occurred. Instead of recognizing the presence behind the man, we began to worship the man and forget the presence. Instead of entering the consciousness from which Jesus spoke, we built systems to admire him from afar. And the moment that happened, the living Christ was veiled behind a historical figure. But Jesus never intended to be worshipped. He intended to be understood. He did not say, I alone am the light of the world. He said, you are the light of the world. He did not say, only I and my Father are one. He prayed that all may be one, even as we are one. And he did not say, follow me so that you may admire me. He said, follow me that you may do the works that I do. The purpose of a spiritual teacher is not to become an object of devotion. The purpose is to awaken the same realization in the hearts of those who are ready. But when the teacher leaves the world, the human mind, unable to grasp the depth of the revelation, clings to the form of the teacher and loses the spirit of the teaching. And so a living revelation becomes a doctrine. A spiritual identity becomes a creed. A universal truth becomes a historical event. Religion, with all its beauty and devotion, eventually wrapped the name of Jesus in such reverence that the very principle he taught became inaccessible. Instead of discovering the Christ within, humanity bowed before the Christ without. Instead of awakening to the presence, humanity worshiped the person. And slowly, without malice but with deep sincerity, the revelation was replaced by the ritual. Jesus said, the Father within me, he doeth the works. Yet how many have been taught to look outside themselves for the Father? Jesus said, the kingdom of God is within you. Yet how many have been instructed to seek a kingdom in the sky? Jesus said, the works that I do shall you do also. Yet how many have believed such works to be impossible? This is the great misunderstanding. Not a failure of faith, but a failure of identity. For when you believe that the Christ belongs to one man alone, you separate yourself from the very presence that seeks expression as you. When you exalt the messenger above the message, you turn revelation into remembrance and remembrance into ritual. And then the living presence, the indwelling Christ, becomes a distant hope instead of an immediate reality. Joel Goldsmith never criticized religion. He honored its role, its beauty, its sincerity. But he also understood this. Religion inherited the outer story of Jesus without entering the inner consciousness from which Jesus lived. Religion preserved the biography of the man while losing the revelation of the I that animated him. That is why the world still prays to God as though God were out there. That is why suffering persists even among the devout. That is why spiritual longing remains unfulfilled despite centuries of worship. We have been looking in the wrong direction, outward instead of inward, upward instead of inward, toward a person instead of toward the presence that Jesus called the Father within. This is not a criticism. It is an invitation to rediscover the revelation Jesus intended, the revelation that Joel Goldsmith reawakened. The Christ is not a person to worship, but a presence to recognize. And until this recognition dawns, the spiritual life remains a search instead of a realization. Let us be clear. Honoring Jesus is not wrong, but to honor him truly is to understand what he understood, to see as he saw, to live as he lived, from the center of divine identity, from the I within, from the Christ that is not limited to one form, but expressed through the infinite variety of life. This is the misunderstanding we must gently lay aside. Not by rejecting religion, not by opposing belief, but by going deeper than belief into the awareness of the one who says, I. For the revelation Jesus brought can never be restored to its purity until it is recognized where he placed it within you. Let us move now into the heart of the revelation, not the revelation given 2,000 years ago alone, but the revelation that is being whispered into your own consciousness at this very moment. For truth is never a matter of history. Truth is eternally present, eternally speaking, eternally waiting for recognition, and if you listen deeply, you will hear the same voice that spoke through Jesus, the same presence that he called the Father, the same light he named the Christ. What, then, did Jesus reveal? He revealed the universality of the I am. When Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, he was not describing a human being. He was not identifying a personality. He was speaking from the infinite identity that is the life of all creation. He spoke from the same I am that spoke to Moses, saying, I am that I am. He spoke from the divine consciousness that existed before Abraham, before Israel, before the world. This is why he could say, before Abraham was, I am. Not I was, but I am the eternal, unchanging, impersonal presence. You must understand this clearly, for the entire spiritual path rests upon this one realization. The I that Jesus spoke from is the I that you speak from when you say, I am. The difference is not in nature, but in awareness. This is why he could say, before Abraham was, I am. Not I was, but I am the eternal, unchanging, impersonal presence. And so we made of Jesus something he never claimed to be, a solitary miracle worker, a unique spiritual exception, but he never presented himself as an exception. He came as an example. He came as a witness to the truth of our being. Everything he said, everything he did, pointed not to his superiority, but to the Christ nature within all. This is why he said, you are the light of the world. This is why he said, the kingdom of God is within you. This is why he said, the works that I do shall you do also. This is why he said, I ascend to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. He did not divide himself from humanity. Humanity divided itself from him. When Jesus said, "I and the Father are one," he revealed what is true of every soul. He was speaking from the Father consciousness, the God awareness, the place where there is no personal identity, only divine expression. And in that consciousness, all are one, all are equal, all are complete, all are whole. But because human thought identifies with the body and the personality, we assume Jesus must be speaking about his particular person. Yet no person can be one with the infinite. Only the infinite can be one with the infinite. Jesus was not proclaiming the greatness of Jesus. He was revealing the nature of the I that lives as all. This I is birthless. This I is deathless. This I is the spiritual reality behind every form. This I is the Christ. And here lies the essence of the teaching. The moment you say, "I am," you are using the divine name. You are invoking the presence that Jesus embodied. But when you attach that "I am" to a condition, I am sick, I am afraid, I am poor, I am unworthy, you are identifying the infinite with the finite, the eternal with the temporary, the real with the unreal. Jesus refused to do that. He refused to identify the Christ with condition. He refused to say, "I am the needy one, I am the sinner, I am the victim." Instead, he said, "I am the light, I am the resurrection, I am the truth, I am the life." He spoke always from the standpoint of the eternal identity. And that is why his words carried authority, because they arose from what is true, not from what appears. Joel Goldsmith understood this with such depth that it changed the entire direction of his life. He discovered that when the I of you is recognized as the Christ, life begins to unfold from the inside out. No longer do you seek God externally. No longer do you pray as a person pleading with a distant power. Instead, you rest in the realization that the Father, the Infinite, is the very essence of your being. This is the universality of the I am. It is not limited by race or religion, by creed or culture, by time or place. It is the divine identity present in every mystic, every prophet, every awakened soul. It is the silent core of all spiritual revelation. And it is the truth that Jesus came to reveal, not as a doctrine, but as a living reality. The I am is the way. The I am is the truth. The I am is the life, not because the man Jesus claimed it, but because the Christ, the universal presence of God, speaks those words through every awakened heart. And so the question now is not, who was Jesus? The question is, who is the I that I am? And as that question dawns in your contemplative moments, the Christ begins to reveal itself not as a concept, not as a philosophy, but as the living presence that has been the core of your being from the beginning. As we continue, let us turn inward again, for the truth we approach cannot be grasped intellectually. It must be sensed, felt, recognized in the silence of your own being. Truth is not taught from one mind to another. Truth is revealed from the depth of the soul to the depth of the soul. And it is in this spirit that we explore what Joel Goldsmith discovered through years of contemplation, meditation, and inner listening. Joel Goldsmith was not a theologian. He was not a metaphysician in the academic sense. He was a man who sought reality. He wanted to know God not as a belief, not as a hope, not as a doctrine, but as living presence. And so he turned away from outward systems, away from rituals, away from second-hand truth. He sat in silence, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days, waiting, listening, yielding, and in this stillness, something extraordinary began to unfold. Joel discovered that the Christ is not an attribute. It is not a quality. It is not even an experience. The Christ is the invisible presence of God expressing as individual being. It is the spiritual identity that lives where you think your personal self resides. It is the I behind the I, the life behind the life, the consciousness behind all consciousness. He discovered that the Christ is not confined to the figure of Jesus. It is not limited to one religion, one tradition, one nation, or one era. It is the eternal selfhood that existed before you were born and will exist long after the body has dissolved. It is the infinite nature of God revealing itself at the point of your individuality. Joel realized that every healing, every supply, every illumination comes not from a person asking God, but from the Christ revealing itself as the truth of being. When Jesus healed, he did so not by reaching outward to a power. He did so by recognizing the presence within the Father, within the Christ within. And that same presence lives as you. That same light seeks expression through you. That same consciousness is the foundation of your very existence. You see, the Christ is not a power you acquire. It is the nature of your being. But as long as you identify yourself as a separate person, as a mind with private thoughts, as a body with private conditions, you cannot perceive the Christ. Not because the Christ is absent, but because your attention is fixed on the garment instead of the life that wears it. Joel discovered this by experience. In moments of profound silence, he felt the dissolving of personal identity. He could sense the presence moving through him, thinking through him, speaking through him. He realized that the words he spoke were not his words. They were the utterances of the Christ consciousness pouring through an open, surrendered mind. And this became the foundation of his ministry. That the Christ is impersonal. It belongs to no one. It expresses through anyone who becomes still enough to hear its voice. The Christ is the invisible fabric of all creation. It is the substance of every form. It is the intelligence that orchestrates the body, the harmony that organizes life, the love that holds the universe in being. It is the same presence that Jesus revealed, the same presence Moses glimpsed, the same presence that is spoken through saints, sages, and mystics throughout time. Joel discovered that when the personal sense of I is set aside even for a moment, the Christ rushes into expression, not as an emotional sensation, but as a deep peace, a clarity, a knowing, a sense of being cared for, guided, sustained by an infinite love. He found that the Christ is not awakened by effort. It is revealed by surrender. It is not summoned by words. It is known by silence. It does not rise through striving. It appears the moment you stop trying to be something and simply be. And so he taught that healing is not a correction of the external. It is the recognition of the inner. Supply is not the attraction of something absent. It is the unveiling of the infinite fullness already present. Peace is not the elimination of conflict. It is the revelation of the Christ, which has never been troubled. Joel often said, "We do not bring God into our experience. We bring our experience into God. This is the secret of the Christ." When you identify with the presence, your outer life takes on the harmony of that presence. When you identify with the personal self, your outer life reflects the limitations of that belief. This was Joel Goldsmith's discovery, that the Christ is the invisible reality of all being, that it is the essence of your existence, and that the entire spiritual journey is the quiet remembrance of what has always been true. Nothing is added, nothing is acquired, nothing is improved, only recognized. And as this recognition deepens, you begin to understand why Jesus said, "He that hath seen me hath seen the Father." Not because Jesus was the only Christ, but because the Christ is the universal self And when that self shines through any individual, the Father is revealed. This is the Christ, as Joel discovered it, the silent presence, living as you, waiting to be acknowledged, waiting to be recognized, waiting to be lived. Let us move now into one of the most liberating realizations on the spiritual path, a truth so simple yet so profound that its absence has shaped centuries of spiritual misunderstanding. It is this: God is impersonal, not distant, not cold, not mechanical, but free of human attributes, free of partiality, free of preference, free of the limitations we impose upon the divine through personal belief. Religion, in its sincerity, could not teach this, not because religion wished to withhold truth, but because the human mind was not yet able to grasp a God without a face, a God without form, a God without human desires. The mind always seeks to make God in its own image a personal ruler, a parental figure, a being who loves some, blesses some, forgives some, and judges others. But this is not the nature of God. This is the nature of human imagination. Joel Goldsmith discovered that the moment you make God personal, you separate yourself from the infinite. You create the illusion of a God somewhere and a seeker somewhere else. You create a gap that must be bridged, a distance that must be crossed, a need that must be fulfilled. And this false distance becomes the source of all suffering. But God cannot be personal. For if God were personal, God would be limited. If God preferred one soul over another, God would be divided. If God rewarded the good and punished the bad, God would cease to be omnipresent love. The impersonal nature of God means this: God does not act upon you. God expresses as you. God does not choose for you. God unfolds through you. God does not send blessings. God is the blessing that is your life. Religion, as a structure of belief, could not teach this because the personal mind cannot comprehend a presence that does not think as humans think. And so, to comfort the mind, religion gave God a personality. It gave God anger, mercy, disappointment, approval. It gave God human emotions so that human beings could relate to the infinite. But the spiritual journey is not about making God relatable. It is about realizing that the one we call God is the very essence of our own being. When Jesus referred to the Father, he did not speak of a being outside himself. He spoke of the impersonal life within the infinite consciousness that acts without preference, loves without condition, gives without measure. He said, "The Father knoweth what you have need of before you ask," not because God is watching from a distance, but because the Father is the life of you. The Father is the mind through which you think, the breath through which you live, the beings for which you are conscious. This is why Jesus could say, "It is the Father within me that doeth the works." He understood that no person performs a spiritual act. Only the impersonal presence expresses itself through the form we call human. Joel Goldsmith taught this with extraordinary clarity. He said that once you understand the impersonal nature of God, prayer changes forever. You stop praying to God and you begin resting in God. You stop asking for things and you begin recognizing that the fullness of the infinite is already the substance of your being. You stop seeking God's intervention because you realize there is no external power to intervene, only the inner presence to be recognized. This impersonal God is not aloof. This impersonal God is pure love. But it is a love that does not fluctuate. It does not come and go. It does not depend on your conduct, your beliefs, or your worthiness. It simply is. And because it is impersonal, it is everywhere equally. It is the same in the saint and in the sinner. It is the same in the enlightened and in the ignorant. It is the same in every creature, every form, every expression of life. Religion could not teach this because an impersonal God cannot be controlled, cannot be bargained with, cannot be used as a tool for human morality. An impersonal God cannot be claimed as ours against theirs. An impersonal God does not punish, does not reward, does not withhold, does not bribe. And so, for many centuries, the world held to a personal deity because the personal mind could understand it. But the spiritual heart cannot awaken fully until it moves beyond this belief. To awaken to the impersonal nature of God is to awaken to the truth that God is not a someone, not an other, not a being, separate from your being. God is the invisible fabric of your existence. God is the I that lives as you. God is the Christ, the eternal, impersonal, universal presence expressing individually as your life. And when you know this, you no longer ask God to change the world. You allow God to reveal the world as it sees it. You no longer plead for healing. You rest in the truth that the Christ, your true self, is never sick. You no longer pursue supply. You recognize that the infinite cannot lack. You no longer seek peace. You discover that peace is the nature of your own being. This is the truth religion could not teach, not out of unwillingness, but out of necessity. Humanity had to grow into it. And now, as consciousness evolves, this truth stands ready to be understood by all who can enter the silence and listen. God is not personal. God is presence. God is not elsewhere. God is the life that says I. And when this is realized, the spiritual journey truly begins. Now we come to the living heart of the spiritual path, the point where truth must pass from the level of concept into the depth of realization. For no amount of reading, no amount of hearing, no amount of believing can awaken the Christ. Only recognition can. Recognition is not an act of the mind. Recognition is an opening of consciousness. Recognition is the gentle turning from appearance to reality, from form to substance, from the personal sense of self to the infinite I that stands behind all being. The Christ within you does not need to be awakened. It is already awake. It is already whole. It is already complete. What must awaken is your awareness of it. And this awareness comes through a simple sacred practice that Joel Goldsmith called recognizing the presence. This is not something you do loudly. It is not something you do aggressively. It is not something you do with willpower or effort. It is something you do softly, tenderly, with the same stillness with which you might watch a sunrise or listen to the quiet breathing of a sleeping child. The practice begins with a pause. Whenever fear appears, you pause. Whenever lack appears, you pose. Whenever conflict appears, you pause. Whenever the mind rushes into reaction, you pause. In that pause, you withdraw your identification from the condition before you. You do not try to change the condition. You do not argue with it. You do not deny it. You simply look away from appearance and turn toward the I that is aware of it. You ask gently, who is the I that sees this? Who is the I that feels this? Who is the I that is present right now? This question, asked not intellectually but contemplatively, separates the false sense of self from the true. For the moment you ask, who is the I, the mind cannot answer, the body cannot answer, the emotions cannot answer, only the silence can respond. And in that silence, the Christ begins to reveal itself. You begin to sense, even faintly, that the I which is aware of fear cannot fear. The I which is aware of lack cannot lack. The I which is aware of pain cannot suffer. The I, which is aware of conditions, is not conditioned by them. This gentle recognition is the first step in awakening the Christ within. Then, as you rest in this awareness, a second realization dawns. The I that I am is the presence of God, not metaphorically, not figuratively, literally. You begin to see that the Christ is not something you become, it is something you uncover. You remove the belief that you are a limited person, and the Christ which has always been your true self stands revealed. This is why Joel Goldsmith taught that you never declare, I am sick, or I am poor, or I am afraid. The I that speaks these words is not the person you believe yourself to be. It is the Christ, and the Christ cannot be sick, cannot be poor, cannot be afraid. To attach I am to any appearance is to claim unreality as identity, and the moment you do that, you suffer. Recognition reverses this mistake. Recognition restores identity. Recognition is salvation. And so you practice. I am not seeking God. The I that I am is the presence of God. I am not lacking supply. The I that I am is infinite abundance. I am not trying to be healed. The I that I am is wholeness itself. This is not affirmation. Affirmations attempt to make something true. Recognition acknowledges what already is true. And the more you rest in recognition, the more natural it becomes. You begin to find yourself pausing throughout the day without effort. You begin to sense the presence even while engaged in ordinary activities. The Christ becomes not a momentary experience, but the background of your life, the quiet light that illumines every thought, every breath, every step. This is not affirmation. Affirmations attempt to make something true. Recognition acknowledges what already is true. I am not seeking God. The I that I am is the presence of God. Awakening the Christ is not a dramatic event. It is a quiet remembering, a soft yielding, a gentle, trusting, a continual returning to the inner presence. Perhaps at first you feel only a slight peace, then a little more clarity, then a subtle joy that arises for no reason, then moments of profound stillness in which you seem to dissolve into the infinite. This is the Christ taking form in your awareness. This is the presence revealing itself as your true identity. Awakening the Christ is not a dramatic event. It is a quiet remembering, a soft yielding, a gentle, trusting, a continual returning to the inner presence. Perhaps at first you feel only a slight peace, then a little more clarity, then a subtle joy that arises for no reason, then moments of profound stillness in which you seem to dissolve into the infinite. This is the Christ taking form in your awareness. This is the presence revealing itself as your true identity. For it is one thing to recognize the Christ within, it is another to live as that Christ. And the difference lies in one simple shift, the dissolution of personal sense. What is personal sense? It is the belief that you are a separate being with a private life, a private mind, private fears, private burdens, private responsibilities. It is the belief that you must direct your life, solve your problems, heal your body, earn your supply, protect your identity. This is personal sense. And as long as you live from personal sense, you live outside the rhythm of the Christ. The Christ is the presence of God individualized as you. The Christ is infinite life expressing through your form. The Christ is the I that needs nothing, fears nothing, lacks nothing, seeks nothing. The Christ does not struggle, does not strive, does not react, does not defend, does not resist. You begin to sense, even faintly, that the I, which is aware of fear, cannot fear. The I, which is aware of lack, cannot lack. The I, which is aware of pain, cannot suffer. The I, which is aware of conditions, is not conditioned by them. You begin to sense gently at first, then more clearly that something deeper is living you, something wiser is thinking through you, something greater is guiding, sustaining, unfolding your every step. Joel Goldsmith once said that the greatest spiritual attainment is simply this: the end of the personal I. Not the destruction of individuality, but the dissolving of the belief that your individuality is separate from God. When personal sense dissolves, life becomes effortless, not because circumstances change, but because identity changes. A wave that knows itself as water can never fear the wind. A branch that knows itself as the vine can never fear drought. A form that knows itself as spirit can never fear the world. And so you begin to walk differently. You begin to think differently. You begin to respond differently. Where you once said, I need supply, you now rest in, the I that I am is infinite abundance. Where you once said, I must fix this sickness, you now rest in, the I that I am cannot be sick. Where you once said, I am afraid, you now rest in, the I that I am is perfect peace. This is not denial. It is truth. It is living from the Christ rather than from personal sense. Living as the Christ means that you no longer take ownership of the outer picture. You no longer judge appearances as good or bad. You no longer interpret events through the lens of fear. You no longer see people as separate selves acting upon you. You see only the unfolding of consciousness, the movement of the inner presence expressing as experience. And then something remarkable happens. Because you no longer live from personal sense, the world can no longer touch you personally. Criticism falls away. Praise falls away. Fear falls away. Ambition falls away. Regret falls away. Attachment falls away. All the burdens of personal identity sink into the nothingness from which they came. You discover that you are no longer living from reaction, but from realization, no longer from effort, but from presence, no longer from fear, but from love, no longer from need, but from completeness. This is not something you force. It is something that happens naturally as the recognition of the Christ deepens. You do not decide to live as the Christ. The Christ lives itself through you the moment you stop trying to live as a person. And so the spiritual life becomes simple. When a fear arises, pause. When a desire arises, pause. When an irritation arises, pause. When a judgment arises, pause. Each pause loosens the hold of personal sense. Each pause returns you to the Christ. Each pause reveals the infinite as the true I of you. Living as the Christ does not mean perfection of behavior. It means transparency of identity. You may still experience human feelings, but you no longer identify with them. You may still move in the world, but you no longer feel bound to it. You may still act, but the action is not yours. It is the unfolding of the presence. Eventually, you begin to sense a deep shift within. You are no longer trying to live the spiritual life. You are no longer trying to be awakened or enlightened or healed or supplied. You find that you are resting quietly, naturally, joyfully, in the realization that life is living itself as you. This is the end of personal sense. This is the beginning of Christed living. This is the essence of the infinite way. And now we come to a mystery that has puzzled seekers for centuries. Why was this teaching the Christ within the I am identity, the end of personal sense not given openly to the world? Why did Jesus speak in parables? Why did the early mystics veil their wisdom? Why has so much of this truth remained concealed? You find that you are resting quietly, naturally, joyfully, in the realization that life is living itself as you. It is not because truth was withheld. It is because consciousness was not yet prepared to receive it. Humanity, for most of its history, has lived under the hypnosis of personal sense, identifying itself as flesh, as form, as mind, as emotion. A world that believes it is separate cannot bear the revelation that separation has never existed. A world that believes God is elsewhere cannot understand that God is the very life of its own being. And so the teaching lived quietly, passed from heart to heart, not because it was secret, but because it was sacred. Not because it was exclusive, but because it required readiness, an inner maturity, a loosening of personal identity, a hunger for reality over comfort. The human mind cannot understand the impersonal nature of God. It wants a God who agrees with it, a God who blesses its tribe and condemns others, a God who judges the wicked and rewards the good, a God who behaves according to human expectation. This is personal sense. And as long as you live from personal sense, you live outside the rhythm of the Christ. Such a revelation cannot be accepted by those who still cling to separation, superiority, or fear. And so Jesus said, I have many things to tell you, but you cannot bear them now. The human mind cannot understand the impersonal nature of God. It wants a God who agrees with it, a God who blesses its tribe and condemns others, a God who judges the wicked and rewards the good, a God who behaves according to human expectation. But the Christ is not personal. The Christ is universal. The Christ is the I am of every being. Throughout history, humanity has met truth with resistance. When Jesus revealed the kingdom within, the world sought to silence him. When mystics in many traditions proclaimed oneness, they were dismissed or persecuted. When sages taught the end of personal identity, the world called it heresy. And so truth appeared dangerous, not because it harms, but because it dissolves illusion. It threatens the false sense of power, the false sense of righteousness, the false sense of separation. But now, something has changed. Human consciousness has begun to awaken. Not everywhere, not all at once, but enough to allow the ancient teaching to rise again. The world's grown weary of fear-based living. It has grown weary of external authority. It has grown weary of dogma, conflict, and division. It has grown weary of seeking God in the sky while suffering on the earth. And so, in this age, the Christ teaching has begun to re-emerge, not as religion, not as doctrine, but as inner revelation. It is rising because hearts have become ready. Minds have begun to soften. Personal sense has begun to crack under the weight of global transformation. Joel Goldsmith recognized that the time had come that humanity was ready, not all, but many, to realize, I and the Father are one. He saw that souls everywhere were hungry not for belief, but for experience, not for tradition, but for presence, not for authority, but for freedom. And so he spoke these truths openly, yet gently, trusting that those who were ready would hear, and those who were not ready would walk their own path until the moment came. Truth cannot be forced. It cannot be imposed. It cannot be demanded. It can only be revealed. The moment the soul is ripe for it. This is why the teaching was hidden. Not because it was meant for a chosen few, but because it awaited the awakening of the many. And now you are here, listening, seeking, sensing the stirrings of something ancient within you. This reveals that your own consciousness has ripened, that you stand on the threshold of the Christ awareness that Jesus embodied and Joel Goldsmith taught. The teaching is no longer hidden. It is whispered now into every heart that is ready. For the time has come, and now, as we draw this journey to its resting place, let us once again turn inward, not toward the words that have been spoken, not toward the concepts we have explored, but toward the silence from which they came. For if you hear only the words, you receive information. But if you touch the silence, you receive revelation. The entire purpose of this message, from the first moment to this final breath, has been to point you back to the I that you are, not the personal I, not the human identity that carries your name, your history, your memories, your successes, your burdens, but the infinite I, the Christ, the presence of God expressing as your very being. You have not been invited merely to think about the Christ. You have been invited to enter the Christ, to live from the center where the Father speaks, to stand in the awareness that the kingdom is within, to rest in the truth that I and the Father are one. The spiritual path is not the acquiring of anything. It is the releasing of everything that is not you. Every belief in separation, every attachment to personal identity, every fear, every judgment, every attempt to make life conform to your will, to live from the center where the Father speaks, to stand in the awareness that the kingdom is within, to rest in the truth that I and the Father are one. And so, as we conclude, I ask you to pause just for a moment and notice the quiet presence that is here. Not the sound of these words, not the activity of your mind, but the stillness beneath them. That stillness is the Christ. That stillness is the I am. That stillness is the infinite life that has always been your true self. And now, as we draw this journey to its resting place, let us once again turn inward, not toward the words that have been spoken, not toward the concepts we have explored, but toward the silence from which they came. For if you hear only the words, you receive information. But if you touch the silence, you receive revelation. It needs only to be recognized, and as you recognize it, even for these few moments, you step into a new way of being. You are no longer a seeker of God, you are an expression of God. You are no longer a traveler on the path, you are the path being walked. You are no longer a person on a spiritual journey, you are spirit unfolding in form. This is the living I am. It does not need to be reached. It does not need to be invoked. It does not need to be earned. Why? Because you are living not from the personal self, but from the presence that is untouched by time, untouched by circumstance, untouched by the world. You begin to feel the quiet joy that arises for no reason. You begin to sense a guidance that requires no thought. You begin to perceive a harmony that does not depend on conditions. You begin to love without effort, forgive without struggle, trust without fear. This is not self-improvement. This is not spiritual achievement. This is not transformation of the person. This is the revelation of the self. And so I leave you with this simple invitation, the same invitation given by Jesus, the same invitation taught by Joel Goldsmith, the same invitation whispered by every awakened soul throughout the ages. Abide in the I. Rest in the I. Live from the I. Know the I. Let the I live you. For the moment you do, even for a breath, the Christ is no longer a concept. It becomes your living identity. And from that moment on, life unfolds not from effort but from grace. This is the journey. This is the teaching. This is the revelation. This is the I am.